We're going to be talking about coronavirus tyranny and how the deep state is basically using this crisis, exploiting this crisis to wage war on us, on faith, on family, on freedom, on our nation, and on our economy. I mean, what's happened now? They kind of shifted gears just in the last few days over to, they went from the coronavirus pandemic to, hey, let's start a fake race war and let's have our cities burning down. But it kind of feels like whiplash, right? We're going from one manufactured crisis to the next one. But this coronavirus thing is going to be important long into the future. In fact, just because they're burning our cities down now and they're trying to start a civil war in the United States doesn't mean they're done with the using of pandemics and epidemics and outbreaks to impose tyranny on us. So I was asked by Orleen to talk about a few, I would say, very important elements to this. So it's obviously going to be just scratching the tip of the iceberg, to use a couple of metaphors simultaneously. But I think after we're done with this, you'll realize that these people have big plans. They've had big plans for a long time. And if we don't get serious, we are going to lose our freedoms. You guys in California, you're not even allowed to go to church properly yet. I know your governor there is doing some wild stuff. So I want to start off talking a little bit about a report that came out in 2010. It was by the Rockefeller Foundation. And it was actually, one of those really boring titles because they know nobody's ever going to read it. You might pass it in a lobby somewhere when you're in the Rockefeller Foundation and look at it and say, that looks boring, and never pick it up. But if you had picked it up, you might have been quite surprised. They lay out basically 4 scenarios to move humanity from where we are to their little vision of a new world order, a global technocratic system of total control. And this report was called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. I have a copy in PDF. If anybody would like it from me, I'd be very happy to share it with you. I haven't been able to find it online, but it was sent to me. And they have these 4 different scenarios. How can we advance this international order that we want? Well, one of the scenarios is called lockstep. And this is actually a screenshot from the report right there that you can see. A world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizens' pushback. And so they actually talk about having a pandemic that would be a useful tool for not just implementing tyranny, but for actually having citizens beg for tyranny. That's one of the really, really interesting things about this. They expect that people will just be begging for the government to come in and save us. This scenario here, I'm going to try to mute Orleen.
The way they can see.
Let's see if we can mute Orleen. There we go. So now Orleen is muted. And Debbie, in deference to you, I will check if there's anybody in the waiting room. Let's see real quick. How do I make this big again? Uh-oh. Having trouble figuring out how to make it full screen again.
And Alex, while you're looking, some people are calling in, so they may not be able to see your screen. So just in case, you might just, want to just say what's on the screen.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks, Debbie. And I'm looking at the participants list now, and it doesn't look like we have people in the waiting room. So I'll check back maybe in another 5 minutes or so. But okay, good. So let's continue here where we left off. So this lockstep scenario, when you read it, you really feel like you're reading the news today. It's absolutely incredible. So they actually talk about how China did incredibly. Here's some direct quotes from the report. They say the Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus far earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. Now, if you guys have followed the news, you've probably been a little bit concerned by all the praising of communist China. The World Health Organization has been praising communist China. Bill Gates has been praising communist China. Communist China has been praising communist China. And they all say the same thing. Oh, they did so wonderful, right? They have this totalitarian system where they could just lock down everything. And I don't know if you guys saw any of the videos, like welding people in their homes. I mean, total tyranny. Now they've got apps on everybody's phone that will determine whether you're allowed to move or not. I mean, go outside of your house. And So in the Rockefeller report, they talk about how great China did by using tyranny. Other nations like the United States, not so good, right? They have all this freedom stuff that gets in the way of saving people from the real and imagined dangers that our globalist overlords want to save us from. And so in this report, they talk about how this pandemic would cause citizens to demand top-down direction and oversight over our whole nation, over our economy. They talk about shutting things down, government taking control over businesses. They talk about biometric ID for all citizens, and we'll come back to that in a moment. That is very much on the agenda. Rockefeller is pushing it. They talk about tighter regulation of key industries, and if you've noticed, with the exception of what President Trump has been doing, he's kind of tried to turn the tables on these people in a few instances, but that is what they're going for, right? Tighter regulation of industries. They say a suite of new regulations and agreements and much more control to be able to restore order and, importantly, economic growth, right? So they burn down our economy, just as they imagined they would in this Rockefeller report exercise, and then they're going to reopen it by taking control of it. And of course, in case you guys haven't noticed, they're destroying our small businesses, destroying our medium-sized businesses. Meanwhile, Walmart and Amazon are hiring. Pretty soon we can all go work for either the government as contact tracers or Amazon or Walmart. Anything else, small business, rancher, you're going to be in big trouble. And that was all part of the plan, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about the economic component soon. Now, to get a sense of where these Rockefellers are coming from, if you came to my deep state presentation the last time I was in California speaking for the Eagle Forum, you already know a lot of this, but the Rockefellers have really been at the core of this effort to move us toward what they call a new world order. I actually have a book behind me that I think a lot of the people involved in Eagle Forum will be familiar with. I don't know if you can see it up there, but it's all the way up there on the corner of my bookshelf. It's called Kissinger on the Couch, and it was written by our dear Phyllis Schlafly and also Admiral Chester Ward, who had been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a very secretive and extremely powerful group based in New York that Hillary Clinton says tells her what she should be doing and how she should think about the future. And in this book that Schlafly wrote with Admiral Chester Ward, they blow the secrecy off the CFR. He spent 16 years in there, and he said there's actually an inner core within the CFR composed primarily of the Rockefellers and the banking interests. And Rockefeller gave a really important admission in his memoirs. I guess they know most of us can't read, and even the ones of us who can read, don't read. So they feel pretty free and open about admitting these kinds of things in their books. And this book here that David Rockefeller wrote, it was published in 2004. It's called Memoirs. It's like his autobiography. And this is a direct quote. It's on page 405. You can go get it from your local library. He says, some even believe that we, talking about the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of our own country, of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists or globalists, as our dear president would call them, and of conspiring, that's his word, conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. And then he says, if that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. So he's proud of being a conspirator working with a secret cabal against the best interests of his own country to create a one world order. So when you think about, Rockefeller Foundation reports imagining the use of a pandemic to bring in totalitarian globalism, recognize that these people have been bragging about what they're doing. They're bragging in their own books that they hope to create a world government against the best interests of our nation, in cooperation with a secret cabal. And he's the one who used conspiring, not me. So don't call me a conspiracy theorist. I'm just quoting Mr. Rockefeller here, who, of course, was the patriarch of the dynasty until he passed away recently. And, I can't imagine it's going very well for him right now. But, that's between him and God. Anyways, he is a big fan of communist China, as you might imagine. He actually went over to communist China in the early 1970s, back when it was still totally closed, right? When foreigners weren't even really allowed to come in there, right before Kissinger and Bush and Carter and Nixon started opening up China to the world and basically building it into a superpower. And he wrote in the New York Times, this is actually still published on the New York Times website, came out in 1973. The column was called From a China Traveler. If you see on the screen here, you can see a little screenshot I took straight from their webpage. And you should read the whole column. It makes you want to puke, so make sure you have a barf bag handy. But he says that the social experiment under Chairman Mao is one of the most important and successful in human history. Yeah, no mention of the fact that, 80 million people were slaughtered as part of this social experiment. But this gives you a sense of where they're going, right? That's why in their report on this pandemic, they can forecast that China is going to do amazing, amazing things, while that dumb United States with all that freedom, yeah, they're going to be in big trouble thanks to that. So the Rockefellers, one of the things they talked about in that report was a biometric ID for all citizens. Well, I want to show you this thing called ID 2020. This is a real organization. You can find it at id2020.org. Write that website down. It's id2020.org. I'll show you a screenshot from the website in a moment. And this is an alliance of a whole bunch of different organizations, including the Rockefeller Foundation, bringing out plans for a global biometric ID card that will keep track of your vaccination status. And we'll come back to the vaccines shortly. But this plan calls for everybody on the planet to have a digital identity. Actually, India was their first big experiment. They got 1.2 billion Indians to get these digital biometric
okay,
ID
you can do
cards.
it on the paper on the island.
Oh.
With Audrey.
I hear someone talking. So I'm going to
Mommy's
mute.
going to go potty.
Let's see. Somebody's got a baby that needs to go potty. I know how that goes. All right. So, all right. Well, the noise has stopped. So I'll, oh wait, maybe that's where it was coming from. Let me just mute a couple people here, guys. And also, as long as I'm stopped here, I will take a quick break and check if there's anybody else in the meeting room that needs to come in. So just one moment, folks. Bear with me. Participants. We've got, oh, we do have some in the waiting room. All righty. So now they're in. Okay. And I think you guys still see my screen. So this ID 2020, it's going to track all kinds of data about you, your biometrics, right? Your facial structure, your thumbprints, your fingerprints, your retina scan, and who knows what else. And it's also going to track your vaccine information. All slaves are expected to get their vaccines. They say so right in Agenda 2030, right? Vaccines for all. And they don't say for all who want them. They say nobody can be left behind over and over again in this UN Agenda 2030, which the UN is describing as their master plan for humanity. Go read the thing yourself. It's crazy. And this is a direct quote from the ID 2020 website, which again, the Rockefeller Brother Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation are funding. They say ID 2020 is building a new global model for the design, funding, and implementation of digital ID solutions and technology. So all of you, if this continues, if this is not stopped, will be getting a digital ID with all your biometric data and your vaccine information on it. This is a screenshot directly from their website, their founding partners, and you'll see Microsoft, of course, Bill Gates. You'll see Gavi, the so-called Vaccine Alliance, also funded by Bill Gates and the Rockefellers. And you see the Rockefeller Foundation. So they have big plans, and mind you, this is not new, right? They didn't roll out ID 2020 in response to the coronavirus. They've been working on this plan for a while. They're just going to use the coronavirus to accelerate the timeline. Now, in addition to the Rockefeller report, we also had something called Event 201. Now, this was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, by the World Economic Forum, and by the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And we'll get into some clips about this. But basically, in October of 2019, very similar to what we saw with the Rockefeller report, they kind of laid it all out on the table. It was a hypothetical, scenario where they were kind of practicing for what we would do in the event of a pandemic. And a lot of it involved silencing critics and people who disagree with the official narrative, promoting mandatory vaccines for everybody, figuring out how to track everybody's mandatory vaccines, because they don't want to waste 10 vaccines on somebody who's already gotten it, but they also want to make sure that every last person on the planet gets one. So I'll show you a couple of clips from that. You can actually watch the whole thing on YouTube if you have a lot of time. If you don't have a lot of time, you can get the highlights, but there's a lot of juicy stuff in the larger video too. What you see is you have globalist bigwigs from the United Nations, from the US government, from the major pharmaceutical corporations, from the World Health Organization, from all the different players that we now see jumping into action with the coronavirus. And they literally talk about it's a coronavirus we're planning for here, and it's going to kill a lot of people, and here's what we have to do to deal with it. And I bet you guys aren't surprised to know that tyranny, as always with these things, is the solution, just like it is to global warming, just like it is to alleged systemic racism, just like it is to inequality, just like it is to gun violence, right? You ever notice that every single problem, the solution is always tyranny? It seems like if we just gave up all our freedom, we wouldn't have any more problems, right? That's the official narrative. Now, I want to show you some of the stuff that these people are doing. Bill Gates, who funded this Event 201 that almost predicted. I mean, they'll tell you it wasn't a prediction. They were just, oh, they had so much foresight because they're so much smarter than us. That's how they knew to have this. But one of the things that Bill Gates is funding is tattoo tracking technology. And you can actually still find this. It was a press release from MIT. These are direct quotes from it, and you can see the press release right here on the screen. I took a screenshot of it right from their website, from MIT News, and there I zoomed in to the kind of technology so you can see what it's about. This is a direct quote from the website, bragging about what Bill Gates was funding. They said, we're selectively loading microparticles into microneedles. These patches are going to deliver a pattern in the skin that is invisible to the naked eye, but can be scanned with a smartphone that has the infrared filter removed. This patch will be customized to imprint different patterns that correspond to the type of vaccine delivered. So you got your corona vaccine, here's your tattoo. You got your measles vaccine, here's your tattoo. You got your chickenpox vaccine, here's your tattoo. You got your tyranny tattoo. Oh, no, I'm sorry, there's no tyranny vaccine yet. But we'll get a little bit more into the vaccines later. They say these tattoos consist of nanocrystals called quantum dots. And this is actually what the technology looks like. You can see kind of they've got these micro needles and they stick into your skin. And you can read the press release yourself. They tried it out first on dead bodies and on mice. They're like, hey, you know, we can cook this person in the sun for years and still the micro vaccine tattoo will still be visible to your smartphone, right? So, interesting. And this is the stuff they're doing in public, mind you. This is all stuff that anybody can find publicly. And of course, they tell you in this press release, the research was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and a whole bunch of other globalist billionaires. You can go read the press release for yourself if you want. Here's another interesting development that came out of Bill Gates and his Microsoft. This I also pulled right from the World Intellectual Property Organization. That's the UN Patent Office, if you will. The patent number is literally WO 2020-060606. So, you know, a lot of people have speculated about what that means. And if you're a Christian, you know, 666 has some significance. We can maybe get to that later. But this patent is for a piece of technology that's implanted under your skin that will keep track of your cryptocurrency allocations and your health data. And so when your body records things that the establishment wants done, like maybe you've done your exercise, maybe you've gotten your vaccines, then you get your cryptocurrency allotment. And you can read this, I mean, you can actually see straight from their press release. It's human body activity associated with a task provided to a user may be used in a mining process of a cryptocurrency system. And we'll come back to these cryptocurrency systems later, but this is an actual patent filed by Bill Gates and Microsoft just this year to put technology under your skin and turn you into a cyborg so that you can buy or sell using this little technology that will link up with your body systems. Now, this is a little clip from Event 201 I want to show you, because a big part of this is making sure people don't question the narrative, right? And they actually planned for this in Event 201. Well, what are we going to do when people start freaking out about mandatory vaccines and microparticle tattoos and you know, taking away everybody's freedom? And what happens when doctors start saying that this lockdown is a big hoax and isn't going to work? Well, they have a plan for that. So let's see what they had to say.
How much control of information should there be, and by whom? And how can false information be effectively challenged? And what if that false information is coming from companies or from governments?
Governments, they're talking about Trump.
I think it's very
right?
important that we make sure that there is concise communication with all healthcare facilities where these patients are being treated so that there isn't mass panic.
We're at a moment where the social media platforms have to step forward and recognize the moment to assert that they're a technology platform and not a broadcaster is over. They, in fact, have to be a participant in broadcasting accurate information.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I stop the video by admitting everyone? Let me see if I can pick it back up. Oh, I'm sorry, guys.
Partnering with the scientific and health communities to counterweight, if not flood the zone, of accurate information, because to try to put the genie back in the bottle of the misinformation and disinformation is nigh impossible.
One thing we haven't spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news.
Anyways, it goes on and on, guys. So they had this big discussion about, oh my goodness, people aren't going to believe us, right? People are going to post stuff on social media that say we're lying. What in the world are we going to do about that? Well, we're just going to shut you all down, and we're going to censor you, and we're going to have enforcement actions against fake news, and we're going to force the social media publishers to flood the zone with our propaganda, right? And if you haven't noticed, we're seeing that now. Even the president can't tweet anymore without these maniacs telling us what he really meant or what the real truth is, right? I'm sure you guys have followed that discussion. And you know, it's been happening over and over again. Now, I want to give you another sample of this. This just came from the CEO of YouTube, went on the fakest of all the fake news networks to discuss the silencing of critics. So this video that we're doing right now would not be allowed on YouTube because of what this lady says here. So check this out.
We've actually seen a 75% increase in the news coming from authoritative sources since the beginning of 2020. So we've seen a lot of demand there. But then we also—
What does that mean? That means an increase in video views for those?
Yeah, and so we talk about that as raising authoritative information. But then we also talk about removing information that is problematic. You know, of course, anything that is medically unsubstantiated, so people saying like, take vitamin C, take turmeric, like those all will cure you. Those are the examples of things that would be a violation of our policy. Anything that would go against World Health Organization recommendations would be a violation of our policy. And so remove is another really important part of our policy.
Anything that would go against World Health Organization recommendations is going to be removed, okay? So you wonder why they keep taking down all the YouTube videos that are going viral that expose these lies? It's because they go against the World Health Organization guidelines. They already war gamed this all out in Event 201. You can't have people exposing the fraud. Otherwise, people aren't going to cooperate. They're not going to give up their freedom. They're not going to take these vaccines. They're not going to take biometric global digital IDs. They're not going to take vaccine tracking tattoos. They're not going to take technology under their skin, and on it goes, right? So speaking of the World Health Organization, I want to talk about him for just a little bit. This guy here, he's Communist China's attack poodle. His name is Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, and before becoming the leader of the prestigious World Health, by the way, he's not a medical doctor, I should add. Before becoming the head of the World Health Organization, he was a Marxist terrorist, and some of you are like, nah. Yeah. He was actually on the Politburo of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. And most of us don't know what the Tigray People's Liberation Front is, and thank God for that. It was an ethno-Marxist terrorist group in Ethiopia. They were unhappy with their communist dictator. They wanted a more pure form of Marxism-Leninism, and they also had their ethnic group's identity at the core. And so they really didn't like certain other people groups in Ethiopia, like the Amharas and so on. So they had a genocide in mind. Now, this organization was so extreme that the U.S. State Department put it on the list of terror organizations. The Global Terror Database still has the Tigray People's Liberation Front on the terrorist list. And of course, again, Dr. Tedros, the current head of the World Health Organization, was on the decision-making Politburo for this organization. He was also the right-hand man of Ethiopian mass-murdering dictator Meles Zenawi. He was the foreign minister and the health minister. As health minister, he helped cover up a bunch of pandemics that killed huge numbers of people. He helped enforce contraception on people groups that his Tigray People's Liberation Front didn't like. He's been widely accused of genocide and crimes against humanity. He helped sterilize a bunch of people. And he helped provide substandard health care to people groups who his Tigray People's Liberation Front did not like. As foreign minister, he had the honor of helping the regime track down its critics, even overseas, right? They actually kidnapped a British guy in Yemen because he had been exposing the Ethiopian dictatorship. So they shipped him to Ethiopia and tortured him for years. Unbelievable stuff. So, I mean, who else would you want in charge of the World Health Organization? And who else would you want to be in charge of censoring YouTube, right? Of course, people like this, right? He got his post there with help, with actually crucial help from the communist regime in China. Thankfully, Trump has turned the tables on these tyrants, and he has officially withdrawn us from the World Health Organization. He has cut all the funding, and praise God for that. If we had had a President Hillary Clinton, or a President Mitt Romney, or a President Lindsey Graham, or, you know, pick your establishment rhino or your favorite Democrat, we would now be saluting to the World Health Organization as the global, basically a health ministry or Department of Health, if you will. And I mean, they're so dishonest. I just did a whole 35-minute presentation on the World Health Organization if you want to know more. And we'll come back to them as we go through this, because some of what they're up to is crazy. Now, closer to home, I want to talk a little bit about contact tracing. This is an incredibly important thing. Some of you have probably heard about it. Your governor is a big proponent of it. And in theory, it's this idea that, well, if somebody is infected, or if we have reason to believe somebody might be infected, we need to find out who they interacted with. We got to trace all their contacts so that we can force them all to stay home and quarantine themselves. But as we'll see, there is much, much more to this than meets the eye. It is basically a system for total surveillance of our society. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but the bill in Congress to move this forward is called H.R. 6666. These numbers keep popping up. You wonder why. If you're not a Christian, I'd love to hear an alternative explanation. It could be a coincidence, maybe the first 8 times, but once you get to 9 or 10 times, you start to wonder. But anyways, this thing is called the COVID-19 Testing, Reaching, and Contacting Everyone Act. And by everyone, they really mean everyone. So this bill would open up the floodgates, $100 billion to track everybody. They want to hire literally hundreds of thousands of contact tracers now that 40 million Americans are out of a job thanks to their economic shutdown. So they're going to hire hundreds of thousands of us to go track everybody. They're going to install smartphone apps on your phone. In fact, Apple, if you have an iPhone, has already uploaded some software onto your phone to help out with that. Google is doing the same thing. And what are they going to do with all this information? Now that they know who we are, where we are, who we know, where we've been, all the rest of it, what are they going to do with all that information? Surely they wouldn't abuse it, right? I mean, if you can't trust these people, who can you trust? Well, rather than listen to me, let's see what the World Health Organization has to say about what they're going to do with this information. I'm going to show you a quick video of Dr. Michael Ryan. He is the Director of Emergencies over at the World Health Organization. So check this out.
And at the moment, in most parts of the world, due to lockdown, most of the transmission that's actually happening in many countries now is happening in the household, at family level. In some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units. Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them in a safe and dignified manner.
Okay. Did you guys hear that? I almost feel like I should play it again. Most of the spreading now is happening at the family level, in the household. So now we actually need to go into your household and find out who we think might be sick and drag them away to be isolated safely, of course, right? With their dignity respected. If you trust these lunatics to come into your household and grab your children, or grab the parents and leave the children in the care of the all-loving, all-wise government, you're probably on the wrong call. But anyways, we'll leave it at that. Now, don't think this is just a World Health Organization program. I thought I'd show you a quick little clip from California. This is coming to a town, to a city, to a county, to a state near you. Check this out.
And that's good news. But the purpose of this program is to bring on people. We're going to start with 10 people. We may bring on up to 50 or even more as the program grows and as we see the needs for it. As we do more testing, we will find more and more people who have COVID-19. And again, we'll isolate every one of them, and we will find every one of their contacts, and we will make sure that they stay quarantined, and we'll check in with them every day. In other words, what this program means is that we're going to do a more complete job, and we're going to do a more meticulous job of making it less and less possible for others in the county to run into someone with COVID-19 infection. It's not just our county that's bringing more people on. There are going to be thousands of people hired who will be these contact investigators throughout the state. And this is occurring in many, many other states as well, perhaps all of the states in our country. We will be giving intensive training to these people, training not only for identifying and finding contacts, but also in terms of how to be sensitive about doing it. We also realize that as we find more contacts, some of the people we find are going to have trouble being isolated. For instance, if they live in a home where there's only one bathroom and there are 3 or 4 other people living there, and those people don't have COVID infection, we're not going to be able to keep the person in that home. Every person who we're isolating, for instance, needs to have their own bathroom. And so we'll be moving people like this into other kinds of housing that we have available. They'll also have other needs, perhaps, food, whatever it's going to be. The county will be there to back them up and to support them.
Okay, so did you guys catch that? They're going to contact trace everybody, and if you don't have enough bathrooms in your house, they're going to come rip your kids out of your arms and take them to a safe place, and apparently they're going to feed them. I'm sure that'll go well. But, you know, exactly what the World Health Organization guy said. We're going to come into your home. We are going to take family members out of your home if we determine at our sole discretion that that's what needs to happen. And frankly, I wouldn't trust these people to clean my toilet bowl. Definitely would not trust them to take my children. Not in a million years. That's absolutely crazy. We've got some more people in the waiting room. I'll let them in. You know, this is happening all over the country. That's just one from California. Here's the governor of Washington State talking about this stuff. He's going to use the military, and they are hiring huge numbers of social workers to kidnap all the kids if parents might have coronavirus. And keep in mind, all this coronavirus testing, by the way, is extremely unreliable at best. The president of Tanzania got a little bit suspicious, so he actually tested a fruit and a goat and sent those off to be tested, and they both tested positive. Can you imagine a papaya having coronavirus? Okay, I don't trust these people for a half a second. And what's to stop them from saying, Alex Newman, yeah, you have coronavirus. We're just going to have to take your children from you, and we'll keep them safe. Don't worry. You know, this is crazy talk. So here's the governor of Washington State talking about this.
We're simultaneously moving to this second initiative of testing, contact tracing, and isolation of people who, in fact, are infected. We think of this as a smart weapon. And its success will depend on both the state and local public health officials, and most importantly, individuals and families. The fourth is to identify the contacts and quarantine those people who've had contact who may be at risk, even before that they have had a positive test. The second issue is that we will have testing. They will be reached by phone for the results. And at that time, they will be asked some questions about people with whom they've had contact who might have been infected by this virus. The contact tracer, and I'll talk about who those people are, they're very highly trained people. People who were contacted will not know who the person was who provided their name. And we want to make sure that we have enough resources to get this job done. By the end of this week, we'll have 1,371 people who are fully trained when that is necessary to get this job done. The people who do this work are very carefully screened. Ask Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hobbs to address this issue.
We are so pleased to support the Department of Health in its efforts to push the voluntary COVID-19 mapping program.
It's just great to have people who understand discipline and following orders. It's very important in that. I'm glad that we are working in combination with the University of Washington for an app that could be of assistance to people to find out if they have been in the proximity of people who are infected.
All right, anyways, and he goes on. It is a chilling speech. Here is Bill Clinton, and if you can't trust Bill Clinton, my goodness, and there's Emperor Cuomo of New York talking about this too. And notice the military terminology they always use. He just said we're going to have the National Guard do it. It's important to have people who know the importance of following orders, right? And we know what happened to the National Socialists who were just blindly following orders. You know, we may not be there yet, but I think it's important to remind people often and regularly that following orders is necessary up until the point where those orders become unlawful, unconstitutional. At that point, you not only have no obligation to follow those orders, you have an obligation to resist those orders. You know, that's established very clearly in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That was established very clearly in Nuremberg. You do not have to comply with unconstitutional orders, and in fact, you should actively resist them, especially when tyranny is involved. And that applies to law enforcement, to military, to sheriffs, to everybody involved in these things. Here's Bill Clinton and Andrew Cuomo talking about this.
We need tracing agents in the hundreds and hundreds of people, right? You take the test and then you trace back all the contacts. It's never been done on this scale before. This is an army of tracers. They're basically investigators.
An army.
We will do that the best we can with this 7-state consortium. But it could have been done from the federal government on a much tighter, more efficient basis.
Do you think maybe you could get the governors to ask the Congress to fund that as a part of all this money they're giving you? Or maybe it's legal now to spend some of the money, but we need a national core of healthy people who are properly trained to go out and do this contact tracing. We need the bodies.
Yeah, and actually he goes on in the same segment to talk with your governor. I didn't include it, but I mean, if you look at what they're doing, actually the governor of New Jersey, I think his name is Phil Murphy, who went on Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson was like, hey, what about the Bill of Rights? Oh, that's above my pay grade. I don't know about that. But he was bragging that they're going to send SWAT teams along with the Department of Health agents doing their contact tracing. That'll be fun. Have a SWAT team show up at your door. Benjamin Netanyahu over in Israel talking about coronavirus. Says we should put microchips in all the children. What a great idea. They're going to have little sensors, and if the kids get too close to each other, it's going to beep. And yeah, really? Okay. Obviously, people were a little bit upset by that, but this is where governments are going, guys, with this coronavirus pandemic. Now, a big part of it is going to be coming through your phone. So there's a few organizations and companies here. Two of the big ones that I've investigated are Partners in Health, which already has the contract in Massachusetts, and Dimaji is another one. And what you'll find in every case, they're funded by Bill Gates, they're funded by Rockefellers, they're funded by George Soros. In the case of Partners in Health, which is doing the contact tracing in Massachusetts and other states, they literally have Chelsea Clinton, Bill and Hillary Clinton's daughter, sitting on the board of directors. They say George Soros and his Open Society Foundation is a partner with them. So that gives you some sense of where they're going. Here's a little clip where they talk about how this contact tracing is all based on World Health Organization protocols. It's going to go through your cell phone. They're going to keep track of everywhere you are, everybody you're close to. And of course, it's all just to keep us safe from the coronavirus, right? They would never abuse any of this.
This is a demo of the COVID-19 case tracking application. This template app is built on the World Health Organization's first few X cases investigation protocols. This protocol walks frontline health workers through the following activities. It then collects information about these cases, including demographic information, clinical information, symptoms, healthcare interactions, and lab results. It then follows up with confirmed cases 14 to 21 days later to record progression of their symptoms as well as final outcomes. It then registers close contacts of confirmed cases, including their demographic information, clinical information, lab test results, as well as follow-up activities.
So anyways, that's just a little bit there about the contact tracing. Now, Bill Gates is, of course, right at the center of all this, right? Bill Gates has kind of been groomed by the globalist elites for quite a while to get involved in this, basically take over the global health system. And he's a really strange guy. I just did a 30-something minute video about him that I sent to Orlean. I'm sure she can send that to you guys if you want to learn much more. And also, I just finished up with a very in-depth investigative report that's going to go out in the New American Magazine. I think it'll be in this upcoming issue. So people who subscribe to the New American Magazine, that should be arriving in your mailbox or at your doorstep within the next few weeks here. But and there's so much I could say, but I'll just talk about a few of the important things. First of all, Bill Gates, who's funding all these things, has told us over and over and over again that we cannot go back to normal unless and until almost everybody on the planet is vaccinated. And he said it over and over again. He actually went, I wish I had put the video in, but I didn't have time. He went on with Stephen Colbert during the Global Citizen thing, and Stephen Colbert asked him about it. He said, oh yeah, the final solution is going to be when we vaccinate everyone. And even Stephen Colbert was like, I don't think we should use the term final solution can we maybe come up with another term? Maybe we'll call it like the best solution. And Bill Gates is like, ha, 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 ha. Yes, we'll call it the best solution. I mean, so creepy. It's like they're deliberately trying to creep you out. But here's a video of him. And I've got a whole bunch of these that I could show you. But check this out.
Things won't go back to truly normal until we have a vaccine that we've gotten out to basically the entire world.
Yeah, things will not go back to normal. And I mean, he said some variation of that on basically every major television show in the United States. Things will not go back to normal. You will be locked in your house. Your businesses will be destroyed. Your jobs will be lost. Your government will continue printing money in partnership with the Federal Reserve until your money is worthless. That we will continue to do this unless and until everybody on planet Earth submits to our vaccines. And I'll talk about his vaccines in a moment. But I do want to put the vaccines into some context, guys, because Bill Gates has said on at least 5 occasions that I know of, that I have the videos of, and I included some of them in my video on Bill Gates. I'll show you one of them in just a moment. He has said openly and clearly that the main reason he's so obsessed with vaccines is because he wants to reduce the population. And that seems so counterintuitive, right? Because we've been conditioned to think that vaccines would grow the population. I mean, people would stop dying then if they're going to protect us from diseases, right? If they're really as advertised, as safe and effective as we're told, then, hey, wouldn't the population increase because we'd have less people dying? Well, here is what Bill Gates had to say about the importance of vaccines. Check this out.
First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3.
Okay, guys, did you catch that? If we do a really good job on vaccines, on healthcare, and on reproductive healthcare, by which he means abortions and contraceptions, then we can lower the population, or at least lower the population growth. Isn't that funny? We're going to vaccinate everybody to lower the population. And it wasn't an accident. He said it over and over and over again. And in other cases, he's been even more explicit. You know, hey, it's going to be great. We're going to use vaccines to reduce the population. And in his defense, you know, people were like freaked out about that. They said, what do you mean we're going to use vaccines to reduce the population? That's crazy talk. And he said, oh, no, what I really meant was, you know, because we vaccinate all the children, children will die less, and so then parents will choose to have less children, and so, you know, families won't have like 3 or 4 or 5 children, they'll just have 1 or 2, and then we'll reduce the population. I would submit to you that that's a bunch of baloney, and the reason I would submit that to you is because we have now a long and bloody track record of Bill Gates's vaccine program. So I want to just talk a couple of things about Bill Gates before we get into the last few things here. So Bill Gates and his vaccines programs. I want to talk about one that he did in Kenya in partnership with the World Health Organization. And I've got all the documents to prove this. You can find it online. It's in medical journals. They decided, and this was the year after the UN Population Fund had decided that Kenyan women were having way too many babies. They said the average, you know, Kenyan woman is having 4-point-something babies. That's completely unacceptable. How dare those Kenyan women have all these babies? And somehow it's not racist for a bunch of rich, white, globalist billionaires to say that Kenyan women can't have so many babies. But this UN Population Fund, which has been exposed to doing forced abortions in communist China in partnership with the regime there, is too many babies in Kenya. So the World Health Organization and UNICEF came in with a tetanus vaccine program. The vaccines were only for girls ages 12 up through age 50. And this tetanus vaccine, the Kenya Catholic Doctors Association got a little bit suspicious. They said, wait, you know, why are you only vaccinating girls? And why only girls who are of fertile age? Something's wrong. Something's really wrong with that. So they managed to scoop up different samples of this from different areas of the country. They sent them to independent laboratories all over the world. And what they found was every single vaccine sample was laced with something called human HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, which is a hormone that women's bodies produce and require to be able to carry a pregnancy to term. And so what happens when they were vaccinating these women with a tetanus toxoid and with the HCG is that their body would treat both of them as invaders. So their body would develop an immune response to attack this hormone whenever their body started producing it. So they might get pregnant, and then their body would attack that hormone that they need to carry the pregnancy to term. The baby would die in the womb and would come out, and that would be the end of that baby. The women were left permanently sterile. This is not the first time they did it. They did it in the Philippines. Philippines. They did it in Nicaragua. They did it in Mexico. They got caught doing it. We know from public documents, they started in the 1960s to investigate the possibility of sterilizing women with a vaccine. They made a lot of progress in the 70s. By the 90s, they actually announced that they had a vaccine that could sterilize women using this exact mechanism of action. And of course, they got caught in Kenya. Every single one of the Catholic bishops in Kenya, 27 out of 27, signed onto a statement telling women, do not take this vaccine. It is a covert sterilization program. Do not take the vaccine. In India, you know, the fake fact checkers will tell you it's fake news. It's not fake news at all. Bill Gates was funding vaccine programs in India. According to the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, and I can send you the article in the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, in just 1 year, the year 2011, 50,000 Indian children ended up paralyzed as a result of getting polio from these polio vaccines that were being distributed by Bill Gates. The HPV vaccine, the human papillomavirus, they were injecting tribal girls all over the country with this. A lot of them died. A lot of them ended up paralyzed. A lot of them ended up sterilized. It went all the way up to the Indian Supreme Court, and they determined that there's nothing in our laws that allows us to punish these people. But hey, we got to stop that. They can't come in here and do that anymore. So Bill Gates, you know, for those of you who don't know, he's the one who funded Common Core. Before Common Core, he had actually signed a deal with UNESCO, and none other than Phyllis Schlafly actually got a copy of this deal and posted it on the Eagle Forum website, where you can still find it today. And as part of this agreement, Bill Gates, which he signed the deal personally with his own hand, they agreed to create a global syllabus, global curriculum, global technological standards for education, and global teacher training programs. A few years after that, Gates started pouring billions of dollars, literally billions, 2.6 billion, into Common Core in the United States. And, you know, he actually said in a video, if I had more time, I'd show them all to you. He said, yeah, we won't know if our education stuff works for probably a decade or so. And I think by works, he meant the kids are going to end up dumber than ever before. Now we know, hey, it worked. They're dumber than they've ever been. Right? Congratulations, Mr. Gates. And so now his educational quackery has led right into this vaccine quackery, where he thinks he's going to turn all of our children, in fact, every person on this planet, into a guinea pig in his global vaccine program. Now, keep in mind, this vaccine that Bill Gates is funding to deal with coronavirus, it's going through a company called Moderna, and I'm writing an investigative report about this now. It should be out in the New American probably within a month or two. It's a completely new technology, never been used before. It's what's called an RNA vaccine. And what they do is they inject nanotechnology into you that literally transforms your genetic code. It literally changes your DNA. And these changes will be passed on to your children and passed on to your grandchildren ad infinitum. Now, if you trust Bill Gates to manipulate your DNA, be my guest. Go get yourself 5 of these things. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord, and we will not be taking these crazy, insane vaccines. And it's interesting because Bill Gates has been bragging about this stuff for a while. You see here on your screen, he actually wrote an article in Foreign Affairs, which is the flagship magazine of the Council on Foreign Relations. Phyllis Schlafly and Admiral Chester Ward talked about it in that book that I showed you. This CFR and Foreign Affairs. He said, basically, if you want to know the policy of the United States a few years in advance, just get a copy of Foreign Affairs and read it, and you'll know where it's going. That's how much power they have. And so Bill Gates wrote an article in there in 2018 about this gene editing technology, CRISPR, right? He says it's going to be good that we're going to start editing people's genes, right? The genes that God gave them are not good enough. Bill Gates and his billionaire cronies know better what kind of DNA they should have. So just to give you a brief sample of what's coming, these people, in my opinion, are completely insane, and there's no way they're going to use my family and I as a guinea pig. I don't care what they say. I don't care what consequences they threaten. If I have to, I'll get a darn sailboat and I'll sail off into the sea. It's not going to happen as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to tell you guys what to do. That's for you to decide in consultation with your family and your doctor, but I can tell you it's not going to happen for me. They're also pushing a cashless society. They're using coronavirus to completely eviscerate our financial privacy, right? As long as we have cash, we can buy and sell things without permission, without surveillance. As soon as they get rid of cash, and I don't know if you've noticed, but, oh, you might get coronavirus from using cash. Stop using cash. You have businesses now refusing to take cash. And the Democrats, and, I don't want anybody to think this is a partisan issue. It's not partisan at all. But the Democrats twice tried to sneak in this language into their coronavirus bills creating a digital dollar and a digital wallet to put those digital dollars in. And the way they were going to trick everybody and con everybody into using it is say, oh yeah, those stimulus payments, you want your $1,200? Yeah, you'll get them as soon as you sign up to get your digital wallet. We'll put your digital dollars in there, and then you can go spend your digital dollars, right? That's the direction they're moving in. If you read the language that was in the statute, it was actually removed before it was passed, thank goodness. But a digital dollar is a balance expressed as a dollar value consisting of digital ledger entries that are recorded as liabilities in the accounts of any Federal Reserve Bank, an electronic unit of value redeemable by an eligible financial institution as determined by the Board of Governors. So they are very quickly moving us to digital currency. And once again, we see the same players. Bill Gates, the Rockefellers, even before this coronavirus thing came along, they were funding what's called the Better Than Cash Alliance. They've got Microsoft involved, they've got Gates, they've got Rockefellers, and they've got a whole bunch of governments involved. And the plan was to trick all these people all over the world into giving up cash and turning over to a cashless society. So what happens when you have a cashless society? If the government doesn't give you permission, you can't buy it or sell it, right? You have to beg permission to be able to buy or sell. And if you don't have your quantum tattoo or your cryptocurrency tracking technology, hey, maybe you won't be allowed to buy or sell. We'll have to see what happens. And I would suggest reading Revelation again for those who haven't. Now, in addition to this, they're moving us toward a global currency. You know, and we've been talking about this for a long time. Actually, in 2010, you see a cover that we did here for the New American Magazine called Waking Up to a World Currency. And this was in 2010. They were talking about it openly. Timothy Geithner, Obama's Treasury Secretary who didn't pay taxes. It was all TurboTax's fault. They asked him, hey, the Communist Chinese are proposing that we should move to a global currency. And, you know, it could be run by the IMF. What do you guys think about that? And Timothy TurboTax Geithner said, and I quote, we're actually quite open to that possibility. And I wish I brought the video, but we don't have time. So they are open to this idea. They are moving us toward a global currency. Now, during the coronavirus, they have stepped up their efforts like never before. This lady right here is Kristalina Georgieva. She's a Bulgarian, closely associated with the mass murdering communist dictatorship there that slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people before officially rebranding itself a socialist party. But these are things that she said in press releases about the coronavirus. These are direct quotes. We must act on par with the magnitude of the challenge. For us at the IMF, it means working with you to make our crisis response even stronger. For this, we ask your backing to double our emergency financing capacity and boost global liquidity through a sizable SDR, special drawing right, allocation. Now, when the Federal Reserve talks about boosting liquidity, they're talking about printing money and you know, pushing it out into the economy. Basically, what they've done is they've stolen your money and they've given it to their friends and their cronies, and then they make us pay it back with interest. That's what the Federal Reserve does. When they talk about boosting liquidity, again, they're just printing money and giving it to their cronies. Well, now the IMF is talking about boosting liquidity, but they're not going to be printing US dollars. In fact, they tell you right here, they're going to be printing special drawing rights. This is the proto-global currency that as the dollar is demolished, as the dollar loses its status as the global reserve currency, they're going to be moving us over to the SDRs, and they're already boosting global liquidity by injecting SDRs into the system. So the IMF is now robbing people all over the world to be able to give money to their cronies. She also promised they were going to disburse $50 billion worth of SDRs to help poorer countries. She wants to disburse $1 trillion, right? So when they use these terms, quantitative easing, they're talking about stealing your money and giving it to their cronies. Now, we have real quick, that's pretty much all I had on coronavirus. I'm going to show you these 3 videos that I show in almost every presentation so you understand where all this is going, that it's part of something much bigger. First, I'll show you Bush, and then I'll show you a few Democrats. They basically sum up very nicely where this is all going. And I still have 8 minutes left in my hour, but I know we started a little bit late, so I'll make it snappy. But here's George Bush.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
All right, so the promise and vision of the UN's founders. And I mean, listen to what he said. a credible United Nations is going to have a global rule of law that will govern the conduct of nations. They're going to use their peacekeeping forces, right? Their troops, famous for raping children and women all over the world, famous for trafficking children into sex slavery. That'll be nice. And then they're going to implement the vision of the UN's founders. We had Joseph Stalin at one end of the table, and then at the other end of the table, we had our guy, Alger Hiss. Some of you know that name. He was the first Secretary General of the UN. He was the chairman of the conference that wrote the UN Charter. He took all the delegates down to the Bohemian Grove in your beautiful state so they could do weird rituals out in the forest. And then we threw him in prison because he was working for Joseph Stalin, and we proved that he was perjuring himself in a court of law. So we're going to abandon the vision of our founding fathers. We're going to move to enforce the vision of the UN's founders with their peacekeeping forces, their child-raping soldiers. Now, this is not a partisan issue. As I said, here is Bill Clinton.
Credible United Nations.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
Yeah, right. And here's what you can look forward to if the Communist Party candidate, Sleepy Joe Biden, wins in 2020.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
Yeah, so a new world order, that'll be fun, right? If you think tyranny and technocratic rule and destruction of faith, family, and freedom, if you think that's fun, yeah, the new world order is going to be delightful. And as I just showed you, coronavirus is helping to advance their agenda on every single level, right? And unfortunately, you know, a lot of it has happened in the United States, despite the presence of President Trump there. He did flip the tables on him, you know, with getting out of the WHO, exposing a lot of the lies. But, you know, we're still moving down that path very quickly. So for those of you who don't know me, Liberty Sentinel is my website. I write for the New American and the Epic Times and a lot of other things. If you want to, you know, subscribe to the stuff that I do, you can go there. If you want to donate, if you want to get in touch with me, just go to libertysentinel.org. And then I want to conclude just with a couple of Bible verses real quick, because, you know, I think it's so important to understand the spiritual significance and context of what we're dealing with. So in Ephesians 6:12, God tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So, you know, the problem is not bad guys with bad ideas. The problem is evil. Okay, we're dealing with spiritual wickedness. And then, fortunately, God tells us how we deal with this, right? You go to Ephesians 12, chapter 16 through 17. It says, take the shield of faith, right? You'll be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, of Satan, and then put on the helmet of salvation. And then your offensive weapon is the sword of the Spirit, which is, of course, the Word of God, right? The Bible is your crucial tool in these very, very troubling times that we live in. Keep it close by, study it. You do not want to be deceived, and God will give you the answers that you need. We know that our country is, you know, not doing well. God has also given us instructions for this, and it's almost cliche now in conservative circles to mention this, but I thought it was important. So he says in 2 Chronicles 7:14, my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, and I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and will heal their land. 2 Chronicles 7:14. So he's not talking about, you know, the witches and the Satanists and the others need to, you know, repent and seek his face and turn from their wicked ways. He's talking about his people. He's talking about the church. So, you know, if you claim Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, he's talking to you. You are the one who needs to repent. You are the one who needs to seek God's face. You're the one who needs to pray and humble yourself. All of us, all across America. And, you know, if we were to do that, God would fulfill his promise to us. Now, I want to show you, too, that God has warned us about these people, right? If you're a Christian, you should not be surprised by what we're facing here. In Psalm 2, verse 2, God tells us that the kings of the earth, right here you have a little picture of the UN General Assembly where they all meet and all the kings of the earth get together and they plot their global governance. God says the kings of the earth take their stand and the rulers conspire, is the word God uses, conspire together against the Lord and his anointed. Goodness gracious, who might be conspiring against God and his people? Well, it sounds kind of scary, doesn't it? That the kings of the earth are conspiring against God and his people. Fortunately, we don't have to be scared because God tells us just in Psalm 2, verse 4, the one enthroned in heaven, talking about God, of course, laughs. The Lord ridicules them. So that is really encouraging. God thinks these people are funny. He thinks they're pathetic. They will be punished severely if they don't turn from their wicked ways. And in the meantime, you know, don't dismay, don't despair, don't think we have to go get a majority of people to stand with us. God used Gideon and 300 people to crush a massive army. So Bill Gates doesn't scare me. The Rockefellers don't scare me. Bush and Clinton and Biden don't scare me, and they shouldn't scare you either. There's really good news. I've read the end of the book. We win, and they lose, okay, which is, and that's it, guys. So I think we have maybe 15 more minutes now. If anybody wants to to do questions, I will stop sharing my screen here, and I will pass control back over to Debbie, or maybe Debbie, you can assume control. And then we can see, oh, I see somebody writing a question there. What should we do about all this depressing? So it's not supposed to be depressing, guys. I'm really sorry. I did not mean to depress you. Debbie, I can see you there, but do you want to take control again and monitor this, or should I just go through the questions, or what do you think?
Yeah, you know what? I can't see where I can, I can't see right now where I can take back control of the screen. So why don't you, there were a few questions in there, Alex. Okay. I saw one about CSC. I'm not sure what that is, but I have a question for you. By the way, whoever can hear right now, if you want to ask a question live to Alex, please type the word question. You don't have to write your question in the chat room, but just type the word question in all caps, and either Alex or I will unmute you so you can ask him a question live. So Alex, I do have a question for you.
Okay, go ahead, Debbie.
Under this, yeah, under Agenda 21, the 100-year plan, under the 2030 agenda, which is the first 30 years of that 100-year plan, are the Sustainable Development Goals. And something that has always been interesting to me, Alex, is Sustainable Development Goal 5.2, which is addresses gender equality. And in that video of the director of public health, I think in Ventura County, did you say that they were going to come into our homes, that they had already figured out how to go into the homes with technology? Are they that far? I have a second part to this question. Are they that far?
Well, I think they have the technical capability. I mean, when you look at the technology that the NSA has, they can basically monitor everything. I mean, anything that your phone can capture, including video, including audio, including geolocation, they've got it. Now, whether that's going to be available to Ventura County bureaucrats, probably not. But they can knock on your door and say, hey, we heard you were in touch with someone who had coronavirus. We demand access. We want to see if you have enough bathrooms. If you don't have enough bathrooms, we are going to be removing your children and taking them to a safe location. So go ahead with the second part, Debbie.
Yeah, which reminds me of the census, the fake census that went out where you could get fined $10,000, and they were, I received it. They were saying that if you don't fill it out, you could get fined. It wasn't the decade census. It was like something under the Obama administration. And I remember one of the questions was, how many bathrooms do you have in your house, and how many people are in your household? Okay, so here's the question. Target 5.2 of Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is gender equality, is eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls in the public and private spheres. So all forms of violence against women in public and private spheres, including trafficking, sexual, and other types of exploitation. In their documentation, they go on to say that verbal abuse, psychological abuse. So Alex, you had said that they are fulfilling on all these things, that these globalist agendas that they've been wanting to under COVID. I'm now seeing, I've been wondering, how are they going to get into the private sphere to identify whether or not you are verbally abusing inside your home? And I think you just kind of nailed it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Debbie. And
question mark.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. And the UN, for people who aren't familiar with the UN, and, for people who don't know Debbie and I very well, she and I have been going to UN conferences for years following these people, so we kind of know the lingo. A lot of people, well-meaning people, they hear, oh, we're going to eliminate gender violence and inequality. That sounds wonderful. You have to recognize that the UN uses, they do focus groups, they spend millions of dollars figuring out what kind of terms will be acceptable to people, and then they use those. So when they say they want to eliminate, they want to have gender equality and they want to eliminate gender-based violence, it sounds nice to people who don't know what they're talking about. What they're really talking about is giving governments a giant sledgehammer to come in and smash your family, invade your privacy. And as Debbie pointed out, I mean, how is the UN and how are governments going to figure out if you're psychologically abusing your wife or whatever, right? Well, they're going to do that through total surveillance. And they're not going after bad families. They're not going after heroin addicts whose kids are dying. They're not going after people who get drunk and beat the poo out of their wives. They're going after good families. They want to go after Christian families. That's who the CPS is targeting. And so they have all these tools at their disposal. And there's so many terms that they use like this, like the term human rights, right? Who could be opposed to human rights? Well, when you dig into it a little bit, you realize that the UN's definition of human rights is exactly the opposite of what traditional America's definition of human rights were, right? In America, the Declaration of Independence said God gave us rights, and we established government to protect those rights. And those rights are negative rights, right? The government cannot infringe on your free speech. The government cannot infringe on your property rights. The government cannot, put you on trial without, due process of law. The government cannot steal your stuff. Those are negative rights. Those are protections that you have from the government. When the UN talks about rights, they really, it's modeled after the Soviet Constitution. You have a right to education, which means in UN speak, you have a right to have your children brainwashed with UN propaganda. And they make that very clear in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Go to Article 26. They say education shall be compulsory and education shall further the activities of the United Nations. So if your education doesn't further the activities of the United Nations, it's a violation of your child's human rights, and then the government needs to get involved. Same thing with all your other rights. You go down to Article 29. None of these rights and freedoms may be used contrary to the purposes and principles of the UN. They say these rights and freedoms may be limited for public order, morality, basically anything. They can limit your fake rights under any pretext, but you have a right to healthcare, by which they mean you have a right to submit to whatever healthcare they want to give you. And since you have a right to take other people's money for your healthcare, that means the government has a responsibility to oversee every aspect of your life. We don't want you doing things that might be unhealthy. You might be a burden on the taxpayer. So you see how this works? This is taken straight out of the Soviet Union's constitution. Now it's being enshrined into what they call international law. It's incredibly dangerous. And if we don't resist, that is our future right there. They have brainwashed our children to believe this stuff. It's very serious. So thank you for those questions, Debbie.
This is Troy.
Yeah, Troy. Yes, go ahead, Troy.
Okay, yes. Two-part question. Well, two different questions in one. That's the way the press gets it, right? But they get two questions. Okay, so on the testing, people with comorbidities, people that aren't even tested are written down as COVID, and the misrepresentation of testing, obviously probably a lot less people that actually have COVID, which is just a flu. Can you talk about that, the people with 3 or more comorbidities or whatever? And the second question is can you tell me how all the protests and riots and everything, all the misinformation on that is tying into everything that you're talking about?
Yeah, thank you, Troy. Great question. And so, I'm not a medical doctor, but I've been interviewing many medical doctors, professionals in public health and epidemiology and all these different fields. And what I have been hearing from my sources, and I've written about this very extensively, is COVID-19, coronavirus, unless you fall into some really narrow categories, like you have certain pre-existing health problems, you're very elderly, certain pre-existing conditions, things like that, you're really not at much risk for a serious problem with coronavirus. Now, I have also been hearing from reliable sources, including people who've been advising the White House, that the deep state may be planning round 2 of this, COVID-20, call it. And that one may be significantly more dangerous. So we'll have to see what happens with that. My medical sources are also telling me that hydroxychloroquine is a very useful prophylactic, that it can prevent infection in the first place. That's why Donald Trump dropped the nuclear bomb on the deep state when he went out in public and said, hey, I'm taking hydroxychloroquine. And then the president of El Salvador said the same thing. He said most world leaders are taking it right now. I don't know if you guys saw, but that study in the Lancet journal purporting to discredit hydroxychloroquine, they said it was dangerous and might kill you. That was just retracted. I think it was today, maybe yesterday. To give you some sense of what's going on here. Of course, it has to be taken in cooperation with zinc and also maybe some other things. And that, that's something for people to talk to with their doctors about. And then the second part of the question was, what about these riots? And I think that this was all part of an orchestrated deep state operation. They recognize, hey, people don't believe the corona scare anymore. People have been cooped up in their houses for 4 months. Hey, let's strike a match and blow this whole thing up, right? So they found an incident. The media hyped it and exploited it. They sent out, they got the pressure from above and the pressure from below going, right? They've got their Soros-funded communist revolutionaries, radicals, Antifa, the non-black, Black Lives Matter, funded by Soros, controlled by rich white liberals and establishment goons. So they've got those guys all out there rioting on the street. This is an orchestrated attack on the United States, on Christian civilization, on our liberty. It's not to say that there's no problems with policing in this country. In fact, I've had some concerns about it for a long time. But, even that's a discussion for a local community to have. That's a discussion for a state legislature to have. That is not a discussion for the UN or for the federal government. And what's happened is they're using this crisis very strategically. They're using the old communist tactic of pressure from above and pressure from below. I mentioned the pressure from below is the mobs, the riots, the looting out in the streets, and then the pressure from above. I just wrote about this yesterday at the New American. The Marxists within the United Nations, the communists within our own government are now using this chaos to drive us toward their preferred solution. So let me give you a very obvious example. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. It's a Chilean communist named Michelle Bachelet, and I've been tracking her for years. She's an actual communist. She's a crucial member of the Foro de Sao Paulo, which is a Latin American communist network that our intelligence agencies know all about. Unfortunately, your average American and even your average Latin American doesn't know much about it. But it's a communist network founded by Fidel Castro, founded by Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva from Brazil, the Marxist president who went to jail, the Sandinistas, the mass murdering communists in Nicaragua, and the FARC, the Marxist narco-terrorist group trying to enslave Colombia, with help from George Soros, incidentally. And this woman, who's now running the UN human rights bureaucracy, has put out 2 press releases in the last few days about the situation in the United States. It says America is a country filled with systemic racism. It needs drastic reforms. We need to reform policing. We need to reform socioeconomic inequality. We need to reform this, that, and the other. We need, as Obama put it, a fundamental transformation of the United States. So that's where these riots fit into. They are trying to divide Americans. They're trying to encourage race hatred. They want white people to look at black people and say, oh my goodness, they're all a bunch of looters and criminals, which is of course ridiculous, right? Your average black person is just as horrified about what's happening as your average white person in this country. Their businesses are being looted. Their businesses are being burned down. They're getting bricks thrown through their windows. Their children aren't able to take the bus. So they're just as appalled by this as everybody else is. But the establishment is now trying to whip up race hatred. They want black people to hate white people. They want white people to hate black people. They even want us to be thinking in these stupid terms about white people and black people. It's a bunch of baloney, right? But that's what they want. They want division. They want chaos so that they can eventually come in with their solutions. I hope that answers your question, Troy. There's a few questions here in the group chat. We've only got a couple of minutes.
Joe, question. Alex, we have Joe unmuted. Joe Panzarello.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Joe.
Hey, Alex, how you doing? Great job.
Good, Joe. Thank you, sir.
All right. Hey, yeah, I just typed out my question there in the chat box, but I'll just repeat it real quick. It goes back to when you were talking about the going cashless and about changing to digital cash or digital currency. You had mentioned very quickly that there may be some businesses out there in America already who are refusing to take cash. Is that actually correct?
That's actually correct. Yep. And in fact, I reported on that in an article I did called, what was it? Deep State Assault on Economic Freedom, or Coronavirus, Deep State Assault on Economic Freedom. And I mentioned some of those. So, yep.
Okay. Wow. That's unbelievable, because I don't know how a business could possibly refuse the official currency of the country.
Yeah, well, they'll take credit cards. They'll take, other contactless payments. A lot of them now are encouraging people to pay with their smartphones. And so that's the direction they're going in. Yep.
Right. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. Thanks,
you, Joe.
Debbie, and thanks everybody.
Very good, guys. And you know, it looks like we probably don't have any more time, but a lot of people asked if we recorded this. Yes, we did. Debbie and Orlean, I don't know if you guys are planning on putting it up on your website, but if it's all right with you guys, I might put it up on my my YouTube channel. And yeah, there's a lot more questions, but you know, I think we said we would end at 30 past, so I'll just hand it over to Debbie and Orlean, and you guys take it from here if you would. Thank you.
Well, Orlean, we're okay if you want to extend the meeting, Orlean. Orlean, let's unmute. Let me unmute. Orlean, you'll have to unmute on your end. I can't unmute you on my end, Orlean. But, you know, Alex, I'm okay if you want to continue, and if Orlean is okay with that. Orlean, if you want to continue with questions, will you give us a thumbs up while you figure out unmuting?
Very good. So I'll take a couple of these questions here, if that's all right with you guys. If you need to drop off, I understand. But let me, so several people asked if I had watched Fall of the Cabal. It's funny you ask. I saw it a long time ago. My wife is literally watching it right now, which is the only reason I can get away with, you know, staying over. It's a very interesting documentary for those of you who haven't seen it. There were a few things that I was a little bit concerned about in there. You know, I know for a fact there was a few things that weren't accurate, mostly minor things. You know, I think they would have been better to cut off the last few segments, because, you know, I think then she veers into territory that, you know, it's unverified. It's stuff that, you know, you can't confirm. And frankly, I think it's speculative and may even be incorrect. But there's a lot of good information in there. So, I mean, as long as you watch it with discernment and recognize that it's not all accurate, you know, even this Q phenomenon, which the documentary really tries to push you into this Q movement. You know, to the extent that the Q movement is causing people to go out and do research, to go out and investigate these things, I think it's a plus. To the extent that it's causing people to just blindly trust the plan, which is, you know, one of the slogans, just trust the plan. Sorry, I'm not willing to just trust the plan. I'd like to see the plan first, please. You know, I like what Reagan said, trust but verify. So you know, I'm a little bit skeptical of the Q thing. You know, in the Soviet Union, they had something very similar to the Q thing, where basically they said there was like this secret network. There was people in the intelligence agencies and the military who were going to take down the brutal mass murdering tyrants and all that. And actually, it was just a giant psyop. And they basically just got the names of all the people who opposed communism in and outside of government. And once the operation was finished, they just found them all, liquidated them all, and that was the end of that. So I'm a little bit concerned about the Q thing. You know, to the extent that it helps people, you know, figure out what's going on, I think it's good. To the extent that it gets people sitting back just waiting for, you know, some secret society of good people to save us from evil, I think it's counterproductive in that sense. And there's been a few red flags. But no, I appreciate you mentioning that. All the people who asked about it, I think it's a good video. It's worth watching, but I'll just put that caveat out there that I had some pretty important disagreements with it, even though there was a lot of truth that people should know about. So again, a lot of people asked if we were going to record this video and put it up. Yes, we will. I don't know if it'll be up on the Eagle Forum of California website, but it will be up on my website unless Debbie and Orlean tell me not to put it there. Let's see. Somebody posted the Rockefeller lockstep report.
There's a question from Linda.
Okay,
There's
go ahead,
a question
Debbie.
from Linda. Does CSE play into this?
Comprehensive sexuality education. Yes, it absolutely does. Comprehensive sexuality education plays into all of this, right? It's an effort to destroy our families. It's an effort to destroy the innocence of our children. It's an effort to destroy morality. It's an effort to destroy Christian civilization. And if you want to know, you know, the full background where this comes from, you know, I rarely brag about things that I've written just because you know, I don't think I'm all that great, and you shouldn't brag. But I am really proud of this one piece that I wrote recently for the Epic Times. So I'm going to post it. I'm going to post a link to it there. It's about the history of the sex education and what the purpose was. A lot of people don't realize the so-called scientific justification for all this is from a disgusting pervert pedophile named Alfred Kinsey, who one of the most disgusting people on the planet. He and his pedophiles raped and sexually abused thousands of children under the guise of sex research. They were literally raping babies. I mean, if you look at the tables in his book, they were raping 5-month-old babies, 4-year-old boys, and they said, oh, look, they're screaming and they're shrieking and they're crying and they're passing out. We'll call that a climax, and we'll say that these children are experiencing, you know, climax, and therefore we conclude that children are sexual from birth, and so we need to sexualize them starting in kindergarten. That's where this stuff comes from. The World Health Organization is a major promoter of this filth. If you live in California, and I know most of you do, this is now ubiquitous. You cannot escape it. It is in every element of the public school system, starting in kindergarten, going all the way through university. It's just, you're completely stewing in it for more than 12 years. And so I'll just leave it at that. I've written very extensively on this question. If you do some searches, don't use Google, because Google buries all my stuff now. They make it almost impossible to find it. I know Annetta wrote, please answer my questions, Alex. So let me see what your questions are. So Annetta, you ask, Alex, start telling all of us specifically what to do after we hear depressing stuff and listen to some verses from the Bible. What we need is more specific instructions. Okay, very good, Annetta. I appreciate that question. You know, the reason I always hesitate to give a lot of instructions on what people should be doing is because I don't know. You know, there's nothing special about me that gives me any qualification to tell people what they ought to be doing. All I can tell you is what I've learned through my research. I like to show people the facts. And then, you know, I say pray. Ask God what you can do. All of us have different gifts. All of us have different strengths. Some of us have millions of dollars. If you have millions of dollars, give some to Orlean and the Eagle Forum so that they can do more good work in California. Call up Joe Panzarello and help him out. If you're a gifted communicator, set up a town hall meeting and bring your community together and educate them about stuff. If you're a parent, for crying out loud, get your children out of the public school system. And I don't mean to sound harsh or rude, but goodness gracious. Last time I was in California with the Eagle Forum, I talked about this right here. It's the Rescuing Our Children, the special report we did. If you have children in school, or if you know anyone who has children in school, if you're a pastor who has children in your congregation, get a copy of it. It's thenewamerican.com/rescuingourchildren. It's like 75 cents in PDF. You can order a physical copy of it for like $3. You can order 100 of them for $1 a piece to give to everybody. If you can't afford it, call me or send me an email, and I'll send you a bootleg copy. Don't tell anybody. But we got to get this information out there. We've got to rescue our children. I think that's one of the most important things that an average American family can do, is do not hand your children over to the enemy to be brainwashed, indoctrinated, vaccinated, and all these other things that are going on. And, you know, on a broader level, education is really crucial. Educate yourselves, educate your children, educate your community. That's really the only way we're going to stop this, and be praying. You know, I know it's cliche, but you got to pray for our leaders, for our country, for your governor, for Orlean, and for Debbie, and for the leaders of the Eagle Forum of California. You know, all the people that God has put in authority, that God has given, you know, roles to, we should be praying for them. And, you know, I'll leave it at that. You know, subscribe to the New American Magazine if you don't yet. It's a good publication. It's a good way to get useful and accurate information. Orlean's got a lot of books on a lot of subjects. If you want to do a deep dive on any subject, she's got a book coming out very soon about this coronavirus stuff. If you want to do and some of the riot stuff, if you want to do a deep dive in there, get a copy of that. It'll help you educate others. And I'll leave it at that, Annette. I mean, I could go on for a long time, but I think that gives everybody at least some things to do. So thank you for that great question.
Could I ask a question?
Just to adjourn. And Orlean, there's two more. So Marcy has a question. It looks like Troy has a question also. So I say that because you're in time, Orlean, and how we move forward.
Okay. Do I go now or someone else?
Sure.
Okay, I really
go for it, Orlean.
Thank you. I so appreciate your presentation. This was just amazing, exactly what I was hoping for. And I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on what Revelations 13:16 through 17 tells us, and what we can possibly do for those of us who refuse to accept this vaccine, what we will be able to do if we are not able to buy or sell anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Orlean. That is a really good question. And, you know, that is really my passion, you know, is understanding all of this in the context of what God has revealed to us. And so in Revelation, we have a lot of insight into what's coming. You know, that is one of the amazing things about God's word, is that he told us in advance what was going to come, right? And Revelation is one of the big areas where we can find out what we can look forward to. Also, Daniel is a good source. Matthew 24 and 25, you'll find a lot of information on where we're going. But in Revelation, it talks about a global totalitarian system. And this system somehow is going to have the power to prevent people from buying and selling unless they take the mark of the beast. And we don't know exactly what the mark of the beast is going to be yet. You know, there's a lot of theories out there. You know, there's a lot of people who have different ideas. I don't claim to know what it is. It looks like it may have something to do with some of what's coming, right? You got to take these tattoos and these microchips and these things to prove you're vaccinated and your cryptocurrency and all that. And if that's the case, you know, I think it's very important for Christians to be in prayer and to be discerning on these things, because we know it's going to come, and it might not come in our lifetimes. I mean, there's a chance that, you know, we could turn this ship around and maybe America will have another 50 years of freedom and prosperity, and we'll, you know, lock up the terrorists and the communists that are trying to burn down our society, and the deep staters, and, you know, maybe we'll have another few generations of freedom and liberty, but maybe not. Maybe, you know, starting next week, they're going to order us to start taking some sort of mark. And so, you know, the question Orlean had is, well, what do we do when that time comes? And I think you know, I can't say for me. What I can say is we just need to have our trust completely in God. And I mean 100%. Don't trust in men, right? The Bible tells us over and over again, even if you really like President Trump, and I'm a Trump fan, despite some disagreements with him, you know, don't put your trust in Trump. Men will always, always, always let you down. We're in a fallen world. We're fallen human beings. We have sinful desires. Don't put your trust in men. Put your trust in God. And, you know, throughout God's word, there are just incredible examples of God using miraculous means to support his people. He tells us multiple times in the Gospels, you know, look at the birds of the air. You know, they don't freak out about, you know, saving up a bunch of food and planting and sowing and all that. And still your Father feeds them, right? Look at the flowers of the field. They don't worry about making clothes and, you know, what they're going to wear. And still God clothes them in clothing more beautiful than anything Solomon ever had. So how about you? You're much more important than a bird. You're much more important than a flower. You think your Father's going to let you die and starve? No, right? Your Father knows what you need, and he's going to take care of you. There's a really interesting example too. Elijah, right? He's out in the wilderness and no food, and a really strange story when you think about it. God actually uses a nasty bird that he had told us was unclean, right? Ravens, to deliver food to one of his people. And so, you know what? God can use all kinds of miraculous means. There will come a time where the global governing powers tell us we either submit to this mark or we're not able to buy and sell. We know that because God told us that. It might not be in our lifetimes. It might not even be in our grandkids' lifetimes, but it might be next week. So we should be prepared for that. You know, I don't go overboard on the prepping, but I don't think it would hurt to, and, you know, especially after this coronavirus thing, people were like, you were right. Why didn't we save any extra toilet paper? Why don't we have any canned beans in the house, right? You should be stockpiling those things. And I don't mean like, you know, fill up a bedroom with bullets and beans and stuff, but be prudent. You know, it wouldn't hurt, I would say, to have some means of sustenance other than the system. If you live near the ocean, maybe you can catch fish. If you have a big yard, maybe you should put some chickens back there. If you have a 4,000 acre ranch, hey, maybe put a few hundred cattle on it, right? It'd be wise, I think, to have alternative preparations. But I think the most important thing, Orlean, is always we just have to have our trust in God. You know, our Father knows what's going on. He already knew before it happened, and he'll take care of us. And when it's time for us to go home, you know, that'll be a glorious day. And in the meantime, we've got instructions for what we're supposed to do while we're here. So I tell everybody, let's get to work and let's do those things. So thank you for the question, Orlean. I loved it.
Thank you for the answer. That was perfect.
Hi, this is Marcy. I had a question regarding obviously the HIPAA, you know, privacy supposedly that we have. And so if you do end up having COVID, apparently, then this must be going in some type of database. I mean, so I guess those aren't in place anymore because it was a national emergency, or do you know anything regarding that?
Yeah, you know, I'm not an expert on HIPAA laws. I do know that the Obama administration blew some giant holes into the privacy protections, not just on the student level, right, in FERPA and these things, but also in the privacy of your healthcare information. As part of Obamacare, they basically ordered doctors to start putting all this into the computer system. So my understanding is that they will be keeping track of everybody's coronavirus status. If you've had a coronavirus test, The government knows that. They know what the result was. I think the results are very unreliable. I mentioned earlier the president of Tanzania tested a goat and a papaya, and they both came back positive. But yes, they do have this information. They are collecting it. I would consider it a very significant violation of our privacy rights for the government to be sharing this. But you know, I think you can almost guarantee that they will, and it'll be in the name of public health. And we all know, you know, the Constitution. Apparently, you can put it on pause when there's a public health problem. At least that's what the courts tell us. So, you know, I wouldn't rely on HIPAA to protect your privacy. You know, I'd be very skeptical of getting a coronavirus vaccine or a coronavirus test in the first place. First of all, because they're so unreliable. Second of all, because I don't need the government knowing whether I have or haven't had coronavirus. So,
yes.
I hope that answers the question, Marcy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Here's Troy again.
Thank you, Marcy. Yep, and here's
Sorry about that. I know cutting in on your lead there. Okay, so another two-part question, of course. So can you hear me, Alex?
I can, yeah.
Okay. First part is we see Garcetti saying he wants to defund police action, $100 million in Los Angeles. We hear all over the country they want to defund law enforcement and police. And I'm hearing things, I'm reading things about some of these politicians at the pretty high levels are talking about abolishing prisons. And we know that they let a lot of people out of jail over the coronavirus, which is perfect timing for the rioting and all the criminal activity and stuff, obviously. And then the second part of the question is, during the task force, I was paying pretty close attention to the task force briefings, you know, that the pressers that Trump was doing at the beginning. And he got some of the largest display of military brass on the stage with him one day. General Milley, Joint Chiefs of Staffs. I don't know if that large of a display of military brass at that high level has ever been displayed with the president. He sent them to the border to stop the drugs and trafficking. We know that's child trafficking too, and child sex and everything. And so he's talking about draining the swamp, and he talks about a lot about this. And we're talking about the Russian hoax. We're talking about high treason at the highest level, you know, possible military tribunals. And so how effective, you know, because we're at a crossroads here, Revelations, world dictator, Antichrist, can't buy or sell, tracking. Or maybe buying more time with Trump draining the swamp. I don't know. Either he's a plant or he's divinely protected. He'd have been assassinated by now, in my opinion. So we're at a crossroads. Maybe we get more time is being bought for us through Trump, drain the swamp, military tribunals, high treason at the highest levels. So can you explain more? I'm sure you've done research on that, about draining the swamp and high treason, and then, of course, abolishing prisons, the first part of that question.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, there is a very dangerous effort to delegitimize and to demonize our local law enforcement, our sheriffs. This is, you know, and we see it right now. I mean, it's so clear. They want us to believe that our local police departments are all a bunch of racist, whack job wahoos out there murdering black people. It's a bunch of nonsense. In 2019, 9 black people who were unarmed were killed by the police. And that's 9 too many. You know, I'll be the first to say, but this is not some sort of epidemic that every day, you know, black people are being murdered. In fact, the Wall Street Journal just pointed out a couple of days ago in The Myth of Systemic Police Racism that a police officer is 18 times more likely to be murdered by a black male than a unarmed black person is to be killed by a police officer. So there's a very phony narrative here, and the narrative is designed to delegitimize our law enforcement and turn the people against their own police departments. And there's a deeper agenda there. It's not that they don't want law enforcement. They are going to use law enforcement to persecute their enemies later on. People who love freedom, people who love the Constitution, people who love America, people who support faith, family, freedom, people who don't want a new world order. They need totalitarian police forces. The problem is our local law enforcement is not adequate to that task, right? Our local law enforcement answers to us. They answer to the local community. They answer to our local elected officials. If we're upset with our police, we go talk to our mayor. We go talk to our city council. If we're upset with our sheriff, we fire the guy at the next election and we put in a new guy. They've got to get rid of that system, because as long as we have, 20,000 municipal police departments and, thousands and thousands of county sheriffs with the authority to protect the citizens, to protect their rights, there's no way they can implement a totalitarian police state in the United States. Look at all the totalitarian dictatorships of the last century. What did they all have in common? Incredibly powerful national policing agencies. The Nazis had the SS. The Soviets had the NKVD, which became the KGB, which became the FSB. You had the East Germans had the Stasi, right? They always have a national police force. And in America, we don't have that. We have state and local law enforcement that handles the overwhelming majority of our policing. And if some dictator, some Obama or Hillary or somebody worse came along after the 2020 election and said, hey, I need all the local police to go round up all the conservatives, all the Christians, and while you're at it, disarm everybody, our local police chiefs and our local sheriffs would say, that's not going to happen. And you send anybody to our county to make that happen, they're going straight to county jail, and they're going to stay there until we prosecute them, right? It would be inconceivable. So they're trying to delegitimize our local law enforcement, our sheriffs, so that they can move us toward a national police force. That's what we're seeing with this. They want chaos out in the streets. They want us to think that our local police are brutal, murderous, racist. They want us to think that our local police can't protect us from rioters and looters. I think that's one of the reasons why these Democrat mayors and governors are not arresting these criminals, these terrorists who are out there burning down people's businesses and throwing bricks through people's homes and murdering police and beating people in the face with boards. I mean, it's part of a very dangerous agenda. As for the high treason and Trump and all those questions, there's no question that we have had high treason. I mean, the very definition of treason, waging war against the United States, supporting our enemies in a conflict. We have smoking gun evidence that the Obama administration was engaged in treason. We have documents from the Defense Intelligence Agency proving that they were supporting the Syrian insurgency, even though they knew it was run by Al-Qaeda. We have that same document proving that they wanted to create an Islamist principality in eastern Syria, which eventually we started calling ISIS, or the Islamic State. By definition, that's treason. And that just scratches the surface. There's so much treason, you could throw a rock in any direction and you'd hit some, right? The question is, will Trump actually do something about it? I don't know. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this question. And actually, I gave a speech on this topic almost 2 years ago, I think, in Wisconsin. And it was one of my most popular speeches ever on YouTube. It got over 500,000 views before YouTube finally quashed it and made sure that nobody else could see it. But it's still available. If you want, I will see if I can pull it up real quick, and I'll post a link in the chat section. It's about 45 minutes long, talking about whether Trump is part of the cabal or not. I do not believe that he is. I don't have any special knowledge or insight into that. I haven't talked to Trump about it. I do know that, from speaking to Roger Stone, and he said this in public. I went to his house and did a video interview with him. He said Trump's father was very close to the John Birch Society. He was a big funder of the John Birch Society early on. And he was a close personal friend of Robert Welch. Trump's mentor for 20 years, attorney Roy Cohn. He actually served on the board of the Western Goals Foundation, which was founded by and led by Congressman Larry McDonald, who was murdered by the Soviet Union. They shot his airplane down. But he was the chairman of the John Birch Society. And this is the guy who mentored Donald Trump for 20 years. Trump's chief of staff, who recently departed, Mick Mulvaney, Congressman Mick Mulvaney of South Carolina, was the keynote speaker at the John Birch Society's 2016 National Council dinner in South Carolina. And so Trump has all these people around him who are very, very much on the side of people who support the Constitution, who want to stop the globalists, who want to stop the deep state. Trump was very close to Phyllis Schlafly. For all of you in Eagle Forum, Trump spoke at her, he gave her eulogy at her funeral, one of her eulogies. And Phyllis Schlafly endorsed him. So Trump comes endorsed by very credible people, and it's not new. He's been around good people for a very long time. Unfortunately, he's also got a lot of swamp creatures around him, which is a little bit of a shame, or a lot of a shame. He has been doing a lot of good things, but I think the people who are hoping that Trump is going to swoop in and we're going to have mass arrests of all the traitors and criminal evildoers in our country, I would love to see that. I don't know that it's going to happen. And so, I would encourage people not to get too excited about it, because if it doesn't happen, you're going to be disappointed. But, let's take the good that he's done. He's withdrawn from a lot of UN agencies, including the World Health Organization, the UN Human Rights Council. on and on and on. He has done very, very good things in that respect. He's done a lot of deregulation. So we can take the good you know, I don't think he's been right on everything. I wish he was a little bit more mindful of the Constitution. I just posted a link, by the way, to the speech I gave about Trump and some of the good things he's done. People are curious about that. And thank you for the questions, Troy. I think now we're pretty much running out of time. It was just, you know, a few more minutes before 7. And I think if I stay too much longer, my wife will get mad at me. So if you guys have any more, you know, real quick questions, Orlean or Debbie, I'll be happy to take them. But otherwise, we can leave it there. So.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. You've been amazing.
Thank you, Orlean.
Debbie, did you have anything?
There was Phyllis had a question. So why don't, if Phyllis's question is, aside from President Trump, are there any candidates for higher office who are opposed to what Gates, Rockefeller, et cetera, are planning?
Yeah, there's a lot, and you know, it's hard to know who all of them are. I actually just wrote about one of them over at my personal website the other day. He's running against Lindsey Graham in the Republican primary there, and his ad actually specifically shows Lindsey Graham praising Bill Gates and talking about how Bill Gates should lead the World Health Organization, and then he would double the funding. And talk about forced vaccines. It is an absolutely brilliant advertisement. So he's one. There's a lot of good guys and good gals running for office all across the country. Trump has endorsed some of them. I just posted a link to the brief article I did about the guy running against Lindsey Graham. His name is Michael LaPierre. He's a businessman. He's a homeschooler. He's a real conservative. You know, I would always look for people who are endorsed by Congressman Ron Paul, people who are endorsed by Senator Rand Paul. Those are guys who are really serious about the Constitution, who oppose mandatory vaccines. They're both medical doctors. You know, I think those are some of the well-known ones. But yeah, as far as California goes, I'm not all that familiar with your candidates out there. But again, I would look for, you know, look who Ron Paul and Rand Paul have endorsed. Those would be some good options. And this guy in South Carolina, Michael LaPierre, who's running against Lindsey Graham, is phenomenal. So those are a few of the ones. And thank you for that question.
Great. Well, without any more questions, we probably should bring this to a close. Thank you so much, Debbie. You've been amazing. We could not have done this without you. And thank you. Wow, what amazing information you've given us, Alex. And this video will be hopefully available on our website. Maybe even the National Eagle Forum website would like to carry it, because you have answered so many questions about this virus that people desperately need to know. And thank you all who have joined in with us. We're so glad that you were able to figure Zoom out. Maybe this was your first experience too. And hopefully we will be able to do this in future times. And David Lehman, I see that you are with us. Would you be so kind to give us a closing prayer? Do you know how to unmute yourself?
Yes, I would be able to.
Thank you.
Father, we just thank you so much for Alex's work and his study and his dedication. We thank you for Debbie and Orlean and everyone that has put so much into trying to help people understand what's going on. Lord, we just ask for your protection. We ask for wisdom for Donald Trump and for those surrounding him. Lord, we pray that you will bring us out of this pandemic and give us opportunities to share your truth with those around us. Help us to use this as an opportunity to show people who you are and how much you really love them. Lord, we just thank you for this time. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Thank
you, everybody, and God bless you all. It was so nice to be with you.
Thank you so much.
Alex, you were wonderful.
Thank you so much, guys. God bless.
You know how to turn.